All right, then we're going to discuss more on the Auditor General's report then with SALGA Director, Municipal Finance, Mr. Mohamed Logard. Thank you so very much for joining us this morning on Afro Breakfast. I mean, a lot of things that the Auditor General has raised and very concerning indeed. What do you make of the fact that the Auditor General, and I think just as a start, I mean, there were many other issues that he raised, but the fact that saying that accountability has continued to fall then in local government as governance, leadership and oversight sort of lapses. What do you make of such statements?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the Auditor General is quite correct. There's been, over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been some improvements in local government, but by and large, I think in terms of governance, consequence management and leadership, there has been some lapses in local government. And unfortunately, SALGA, we've done a lot of efforts in terms of trying to capacitate councillors, trying to make them understand what they should be doing in terms of legislation, what their rights are, what the commitments are, etc., etc. But it seems there are some municipalities and some leadership in councils who are not actually taking those messages, seriously.
And why they're not taking these messages seriously? Is it the fact that there hasn't really been sort of, I suppose, consequences for not adhering to what is required of them?
I think part of consequence management is part of the reason. So there are many cases where some of these these councillors, it could be leadership in the municipality as well, year in and year out, the Auditor General is getting similar issues.
Yes.
The Auditor General also gives recommendations in terms of what they should be looking at as well. But unfortunately, the leadership sometimes don't take these things seriously. They don't act upon it adequately. And hence, one of the things that came out from the session yesterday that the Auditor General raised is that he's looking to actually increase his powers or give him further powers in terms of his Public Audit Act. What will happen now going forward into the future is if the Auditor General picks up certain irregularities, they'll give the municipal leadership a period of time to work on it. If they find there isn't adequate effort being made in terms of addressing those issues, the Auditor General will then have the power to refer those matters through to an appropriate investigating body, like the Hawks or whatever it may be, and then they'll be able to then appropriately investigate it. I feel something like that will actually drive further action from the leadership, because now they will realize if they do not do something, the AG will then have the power to do that. So it'll actually drive them to be able to start doing the right thing.
Now that the Auditor General will now have, teeth, instead of just being able to sort of send, give us, the report and making those recommendations, what would then be the sort of, as we've said, now he has teeth, I suppose, to put it that way. What will then be the consequences of not sort of adhering to the recommendations that the Auditor General will generally give if he has the power to do more from that?
Okay, so I think municipalities need to take this thing very seriously, because obviously if it goes to an investigating body and they find somebody is liable for what has happened,
right,
then there could be further action taken. So there could be criminal charges laid. There could be money that has been recovered then from those who've perpetrated whichever irregularities that took place. So I think this will, by that very nature, by him being able to actually send that thing for investigation, it will be enable them to then, it will hopefully give them the wake up to say, listen, we must do something and take it more seriously.
What is the root of the problem? I mean, the Auditor General sort of gives us generally what is, his report tells us where the problems are.
Yes.
But where have the problems actually begun? What is the root of the actual problem?
So I think there's a number of factors to consider. The one thing that needs to be acknowledged upfront as well is that local government is a very dynamic environment. And over the last sort of 18 years that democratic local government has been in existence, there's been a continuous reform agenda that has been proposed. So so in many cases, those who are incumbent in the leadership in municipalities don't have a chance to actually stabilize and get to grips with whatever is currently in place before something else is coming in for them to then grapple with again. So that continuous reform agenda has an impact. The other thing is the issue of the appropriate skills and knowledge and experience. That also plays a very big role as well. And for me, the other important thing that needs to be considered as well is that there needs to be basic financial management disciplines that needs to be inculcated in municipalities. For example, things like basic record keeping, doing your reconciliations on a regular basis, making sure you do management accounts on a regular basis, etc., etc. All of those things, if they are in place, we shouldn't have municipalities getting disclaimer opinions, to be very honest. If they have those basics in place, they should be able to get out credible financial statements. The Auditor General should be able to do the audit work quite reasonably and quite efficiently as well. And also the levels of irregular expenditure, etc., should also be reduced over time. So I'm saying it's a variety of factors. And another important thing to maybe mention that I think is a concern for us as SALGA as well in terms of the local government arena is the issue of the financial health of municipalities, which seems to be deteriorating over the last 5 years or so. That, by its very nature as well, has an impact, because if you were a municipality in the past who had a good financial health situation, you would have been able to exercise good controls, do things as you're supposed to do. Because you're having struggling, because of the financial health being deteriorating and you're struggling in that sense, it does have an impact on your internal control environment, and it will have an impact in terms of your audit outcomes in the future as well. And the reason for the deteriorating financial health, again, is a very complex matter. Yeah. It looks at a number of variables from the purchasing side to the billing side, to the collection side by the municipalities. If all of those things don't function very effectively, it's going to have a result that municipalities are going to find themselves in a financial difficulty.
Now, Mr. Logard, you know, whenever we speak about, you know, local government and governance in the local government, there's always this term that we say irregular expenditure. What is this irregular expenditure, and what is the cause really of this irregular expenditure? Is there a lot of corruption when we're talking about local government?
Okay, thank you for this, because I think it's important to clarify what irregular expenditure actually is. Yeah. So in terms of the Municipal Financial Management Act, irregular expenditure is defined as basically expenditure that was incurred by municipalities that is in contravention with the relevant legislation or relevant regulations. In majority of cases, this relates to expenditure that was incurred in supply chain management or tenders that was issued out by the municipality, where they never followed the regulations fully. Right. So it doesn't mean that there's corruption necessarily taking place. What it means is that there's certain requirements that needs to be met in terms of those regulations. If you miss any of those requirements, your expenditure is automatically classified as irregular. So, for example, if you're supposed to put out a tender for 30 days and you only put out a tender for 20 days, it's taken as irregular expenditure. So there's different sort of non-compliances that you could have that gives rise to the irregular expenditure. Some of it, yes, could be as a result of, you know, let's call it corrupt activities as well. Yeah. But by and large, based on what because we try to unpack what it actually is, by and large, for most of that amount that's recorded as irregular expenditure, goods and services have been received by municipalities. What it could mean is that you may not have got it at the most appropriate best value for money. So, for example, if you're a municipality who was going to buy maybe tractors to do agricultural, you know, services in the municipal area, and maybe you had a budget to buy those tractors of R1 million. If you had done the supply chain management appropriately, you may have ended up getting 2. But because you may have not followed it appropriately, you may have bought it from a supplier which was not the best priced and never met the requirements in terms of the SCM regulations, you may have only end up with 1. Right. The effect of it is your service delivery is going to suffer, because where you had 2, you could have done much more. Where you've got 1, you can do a little bit less. So for me, in an essence, is you've got a pot of money available as a municipality. If you follow the SCM regulations as you should be able to get better value for money, and which should be able to improve your service delivery to your communities. If you don't, there's a potential that you're not going to be able to give them the best value, and it's going to have an impact on service delivery. So in a way, by not following these things, municipalities are, in a way, also, you know, shortchanging their communities in terms of service delivery. So for us, from a SALGA perspective, we always promote, and we work very closely with the National Treasury Chief Procurement Office as well, in terms of looking at the procurement reforms that they're driving, in terms of educating, you know, lobbying with our municipalities, informing them, and also training them on these things. So going forward, they can make sure they do the right things. Right. So, you know, it's an issue that we try our best from a SALGA perspective to make sure we inform, communicate, educate to our municipalities. Is then from their side to be able to take and absorb what we are giving to them and make sure they do the correct activities. Mr.
Mohamed Logard, interesting indeed. Thank you so very much for weighing in on this for us and for clarifying some of those issues for us. That's Mr. Mohamed Logard, who's Director at SALGA with Municipal Finance. Right, let's move on to the next story, but we will continue then with the municipalities and the Auditor General's report.